This morning, this is Dr. Douglas Powe he is the president of PTS, and he is here to speak with you this morning and to lead us in worship and fill the pulpit today. So, welcome.
Hey, all right. Thank you all. It is great to be here. So glad to be with you. Let us begin with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we're so thankful for this day, your presence among us. We ask that your Spirit continues to lead us throughout this day. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen. Amen. I am going to just share a little bit about my background and then get more into sort of theological education today. So theological education is fascinating in terms of, I think it's very needed, but we also are in a time of turmoil in terms of, as you all are probably very aware, and I'll share some statistics, mainline denominations of which the Presbyterian Church is one are struggling. So there's that balancing act. But let me begin. So as he said, I go by Doug, but I'm actually named after my dad, and we're all named after Frederick Douglass. So my full name is Frederick Douglass Powe. My dad goes by Fred, I go by Doug. My son is named Frederick Douglass Powe III, so he goes by Rich, which shares from my wife's father's name. So we'll see if he ever decides to get married one day, what happens. But I'm currently United Methodist, but I actually grew up in the Wesleyan tradition, but in the Church of God. The Church of God out of Anderson, Indiana. As with anything, there's multiple of things. But I grew up in the Church of God, Anderson, Indiana, which is part of the Wesleyan tradition on more of the holiness side. And my aunt and uncle had a big influence, probably on why I'm sitting here today, that at a very young age, my uncle used to let me sneak into his Sunday school class that he taught. And that was my sort of first Sunday school experience, was listening to my uncle teach and probably not understanding half of it, but thinking that I was really a big deal because I got to go into the adult class. But I've been to all Methodist schools up until the time I worked at Phillips, which of course is Disciple of Christ. So for undergrad, I went to Ohio Wesleyan University. Ohio Wesleyan University is a small liberal arts school in Delaware, Ohio, where I was an economics management major, which has come in handy being president of Phillips. But while I was there, a couple of things. The chaplain, who is United Methodist, sort of my first introduction to the United Methodist Church. And I also sort of almost accidentally minored in religion at that point in time. So I disliked religion, and I would take a religion course at least once a year. And when I was getting ready to graduate, the registrar said, if you take one more class, you could have had a religion minor. But I hadn't done it actually on purpose, was just because I liked the courses. And when I graduated, my thought was I would be in the business world forever. So I went to work for a company called Principal Financial Group, which actually headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. So if you've ever been to Des Moines, Iowa, I still remember the address, 777 in Des Moines, Iowa. They're right there in downtown. But I was actually in the field office in Cleveland, Ohio, so I didn't have to move very far because the field office I was in Cleveland. It is interesting. I'm a very early morning person, and people ask me, when I say early, I wake up usually somewhere between 3 and 3:30 every day to get up to start working. And people ask me, well, why do you get up so early? So I said, my first boss, when I started working for Principal, said, you got to learn the business. I lived in a suburb of Cleveland, and the office was downtown. So he said, we're going to meet at breakfast at 6 a.m. and I will, teach you what you need to know, and then the day would start at 8. So having to wake up to meet him at 6 a.m. stuck with me all these years. So I became an early morning person at that time. From there, I went and became a regional sales manager for Blue Cross Blue Shield in Ohio. So people say towns in Ohio, so you probably never heard of it. And I said, fortunately or unfortunately, I got to drive through almost all of the towns in Ohio at some point in time, beyond growing up in Ohio. So I know most of the places in Ohio. But while I was there, the call to go back into ministry came, and I went to Candler School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. So at Candler, is where I got my Master of Divinity degree, is where that sort of love of religion came back, and at that point decided to continue on and do my PhD in systematic theology. So ended up applying to Emory University, getting in and doing a degree in systematic theology. At that point in time, I had fully joined the Methodist Church and also worked at a church there near what's called the AU Center, which is Clark, Atlanta, Spelman, and that. So it's where the church was located. And it was during that time that I also got married. And that my wife is also a ministry and also currently a United Methodist pastor at this point in time. So that was that point. But it was during that time that when I was finishing up a place called St. Paul School of Theology, which is located in Missouri, called and asked me to interview for a position in evangelism. And at that time, one of my mentors and professors, I said, hey, I got this call for this job, but I'm not taking it very seriously because I've only had one evangelism class, and that was from you. I'm not sure this would be a good fit. He said, no, if nothing else, it'd be a great experience. Go ahead and, apply for the position. So I'm like, okay, sure, why not? So I filled it out, and they called back to say, hey, we want to fly you out for an interview, and you have to do a lecture on evangelism. And I'm like, wow. Yeah, that's what I said. Maybe something else along with it. But, yeah. So I went back to him, I said, well, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is they want to fly me out for an interview. The bad news is they want to fly me out for an interview because I've only had one evangelism class, and they want me to do a lecture. He's like, no, how long do we have? I said, 2 weeks. He's like, oh, we can come up with something by then. To this day, I have to think it may have been the worst lecture of all time. But somehow they were convinced that I would be able to do the job, so hired me. So it was after that, actually, that I did sort of a postdoc, because I had a semester, because I finished up in December, so I would start in July. So I did sort of a postdoc for a semester where I actually learned what it is I was supposed to be teaching. Yeah, that's it. Yes, that's pretty much it, Phil. From there, I went to the DC area to Wesley Theological Seminary, and was at Wesley from 2013 until I came to Phillips. Enjoyed my time at Wesley. It's great, except for the traffic. So if you've ever been to DC, it could take you 2 hours to go 1 mile, depending on when it's, it can get really crazy. Yeah, it's everybody here when they say all the traffic, and I just keep smiling, thinking, yeah, this is great. I'll take this any day of the week. Yes, but enjoyed my time there. So, but it's been great to be at Phillips.
Were you teaching there, or were you?
I was teaching there, and then eventually I led what is called the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. And the Lewis Center for Church Leadership, which helps me with the next part I'm going to go into, really worked on sort of looking at sort of denomination and congregations and sort of the trends and things that were happening, and tried to help pastors and congregations think about how do we better do our work. So enjoyed my work doing that immensely.
What was your PhD dissertation thesis?
My thesis was on James Cone and John Wesley.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
So John Wesley has this idea about sort of the image of God and how the image of God is made in the sort of political, moral, natural image. And in his writings, he talks a lot about the natural image and the moral image, but not so much about the political image. And I said that James Cone, although they would differ some, but really sort of fills out Wesley's understanding of what is the political image of God.
Very
So,
cool.
yeah. Yeah, so it's one of those things that probably only I've read. Nobody else reads those things.
What is systematic theology?
Systematic theology is what we call the doctrines of the church. So God, Christology, Jesus, pneumatology, Holy Spirit, ecclesiology, the church. So all of those sort of doctrines that are named. It's the study of those doctrines and the people going back to like Augustine and how they have thought about those doctrines. Yeah, good questions. Others?
I will let you get to your talk.
No, that's what it is. Yeah, others before, all good questions.
Continue.
All right, we'll
Please.
keep rolling. So, theological education has been interesting. When I started seminary, seminaries basically were in this time frame of where there was very little concern because they were sort of in a boom of people attending seminary. And at that point, the churches, even though you could see signs of what we see today, still overall were doing pretty well. There was not the concern that we had today. But since 2000, except for 1 year, and in a second I'll ask you what year that was, since 2000 though, you've seen a sharp decline in all of the mainline denominations. Disciples probably right now are struggling more than most. There are probably about 250,000 disciples in the United States at this point in time. And so, so the numbers are pretty significant there in terms of where they were and where they are currently. But you can trace pretty much all of the mainline denominations and see the sort of same trends that have taken place. Does anyone know what year it did not decline between 2000 and that?
2001 or 2?
2001. Why didn't it decline in 2001?
9/11.
9/11, that's right. So after 9/11, you got this little blip of where
Right.
people decided it might be good to go to church again.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of one exception to the decline. But the question is sort of why are mainline denominations sort of declining? And up until recently, more evangelical sort of expressions had been doing well, but now you're actually seeing some decline there also, so that's starting to bottom out. But why are mainline denominations declining at sort of the pace they've been declining? And just to give you some sort of ideas of what has taken place, that you have seen in the denominations, most of them probably now have more congregations worshiping under 50 than over 50, which is a shift. And many of them are now worshiping under 25, which is a huge shift. So you've seen, the congregations growing smaller. The other change that has taken place is it used to be that when you would hire a Christian education director or somebody on staff, that it would still be somebody who went to seminary. Nowadays, that's not always the case, that you will hire a lay person to fill that job. And it may be part-time because it's less expensive. So at one point in time, you had huge staff of mainly seminary trained people. Now that has shrunk to where you may have a senior person, possibly an associate person if you're extremely lucky, but then most of the other positions are filled by lay people, so you don't have as many seminary trained people in those other positions as you once did previously. So that has been a trend. And of course, you've had less young people coming to church. So you've seen a part of that decline is young people not coming. And for a while there, many of them were in that sort of group where they were sort of not religious. But that has shifted somewhat now, where you're seeing a return of young people coming back to church, particularly white males. Now, many of that is in the evangelical expression, but
Not
it's
good news.
Huh?
Not good news.
Well, it's good news they're coming back.
It is good news.
It's good news they're coming back. It's just, that many of them are going more evangelical at this point in time. But for the first time in a long time, that trend of them coming back has changed, because up until this time, it had just been sort of a sharp decline for what's happening. For seminaries, of course, my concern is, as you can guess, this means there are less people pursuing Master Divinity degrees. So in seminary education, traditionally the Master Divinity degree is a degree that most pastors will go and receive when they go into ministry. And then we will also typically have what we call like a Master of Theological Studies, which people will often get if they're going to do a PhD, and then often some sort of Master of Arts, which used to be people who did Christian education, youth ministry, or something else. We do sort of a specialization in it. And then once you had finished and you were in ministry for a few years, we offer a doctor of ministry. But the sort of gold standard, or the bread and butter of seminaries, has always been a Master of Divinity degree. And that degree, given the decline for mainline denominations and people having the ability to go full-time in a ministry, we've seen a decline of people actually receiving that degree. So that means that we have to think differently about what it is that we do in education at this point in time, because doing the same thing is just not going to work any longer. So, given from your perspective, I'm just curious of, if you were in my shoes, what do you think the future of theological education is?
Are you seeing, and maybe it's too local, but a resurgence in interest, sort of, I'd call it Talarico Christians, sort of that educated Presbyterian, he's going to a Presbyterian seminary, that educated, social justice oriented, the gospel of love, what are the chief commandments, sort of Christianity, and a little less hung up, and also open to spirituality. I think it felt like we had a little bit of the letter killeth and the spirit going on in our mainline denominations, and didn't have a healthy marriage of both the spirit and, being highly educated is not a negative, but being open to the spirit is, I guess, it feels like maybe there's an opportunity there, and maybe St. Philip's offers a healthy balance of those things. But I don't know. I throw that out to you.
No, I love it. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Yes, I do think what he is doing certainly is what you're seeing more of today, that people who are educated, but also, using your language, of being open to the spirit. So is sort of claiming the space of that being educated doesn't mean that I'm not open to sort of the spirit moving in certain ways. And, I think for him, it's certainly, particularly in Texas, has connected that sort of balancing act that he's tried to pull off, and sort of blending those two together. I think the challenge is for seminaries, and this comes to the second part of your question, is that seminaries have done, and I think we do a great job in the social justice piece, and helping students to think about what that means in a very robust way. I'm not sure we've done as well as he has sort of personally done on being open to the Spirit in terms of how do you balance those two things out. So two things, just to play off of that. One is, I don't know, have you heard of Adam Hamilton? Any of you? So Adam Hamilton has the largest United Methodist Church, has, if you count the people worshiping online, over 20,000 people who worship at Church of the Resurrection. But he's getting ready to run for Congress in Kansas.
Senate.
And Senate, yes, yeah. So, and he did listening tour. When he did the listening tour, he, at that point, had done it sort of as an independent, hadn't determined whether he was going to do Republican or Democrat. And at that point, his thinking was he has both Republicans and Democrats in his congregation, so he didn't want to upset either side. So he was trying to find a balancing act. But when he actually declared, he declared as a Democrat because I think he felt that you had to have the party support if he was actually going to win the race. But I think he's going to try something very similar of, even though he's running as a Democrat, saying still educated but grounded, sort of in being open to the Spirit, and that he's been able to do this in the demonstration is look at my congregation where I've done this extremely well. So it'll be interesting to see if that sort of movement becomes more of a trend, and then what does that mean for us as seminaries of helping people to live into that more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Others. What does this mean for, what do you think, for theological education?
Do you think Charlie Kirk had a big influence on young males turning to the church?
Absolutely.
And the colleges kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
changing their views?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whatever your feelings are of Kirk is that what he did extremely well was connect with young people, particularly young males, and help them to see religion as something they could embrace and not something that they could sort of push aside. So I absolutely think that, sort of his engagement and that sort of intentional way of engaging them certainly had an impact.
But it isn't really the gospel of Jesus Christ that we know of love. That's
Correct.
That's inclusive.
That's right.
That's why I said my concern.
Yeah, I get your concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it feels like we did not occupy the space, but it feels like seminaries have a role to play, that we sort of abdicated the space and said religion is for rubes, and it's sort of the uneducated are, only the uneducated are religious.
Right.
And we didn't paint a third way that Tallarico is pointing to, and it's been around for a long time, but it just, the most vocal people have been sort of the militants with an aggressive form of Christianity that goes way back to Constantine and before, but
Right.
and so thoughts on us sort of reclaiming that space.
And I think that's a part of it, and combining both of what you both said. I think what Kurt did extremely well was articulate what he believed to be the gospel. And what we have not done well in the main line is articulate what we believe, even in terms of love, that people aren't sure often what it is that we believe, and that has hurt us. And that gets into that sort of third way, is how do we do a better job of actually articulating and saying, we believe this, and this is actually what we're gonna stand for. And you may disagree with it, and that's fine, but but we believe in inclusivity, and we believe in it for these reasons, and actually stating that. So I know the United Methodist Church, we struggled with that and kept kicking the can down the road until finally disaffiliation, where now I think we're finally getting to saying, okay, now we are going to just sort of own and say this is what we believe, and I actually think that's good and important. But I think it's hard to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and has been hard to get there.
Thank you.
I was thinking that most of the evangelical people who are in ministry don't have a master's or beyond. They go to like a Bible college or are just brought up in the church and begin preaching. So their lack of basis in education, I think, allows for them to have a looser interpretation of the Bible. And I think that that's something that plays into what you guys are doing, because it seems like an easier route if I can just, because college is expensive, if I can just go for 4 years and get into preaching, get into ministry, it's much easier, cheaper, quicker.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm glad you said that. You see, you are really good class. It's one of the challenges, and where Phillips is sort of fortunate. So traditionally, students come out of seminaries with a lot of debt. And, you know, the reality is most times when you're in a congregation, especially when you start, I mean, these are not the highest paying jobs in the world. So that you've had all this debt you've accumulated, and you're not getting paid in a way that sort of helps you to pay that off as easily as some other positions do. So I think one of the things that has started happening, and I believe you all have done the same thing, is that you've created, we in the United Methodist, you've created alternative pathways for people to go into ministry, where they no longer have to actually have a Master of Divinity degree, so that it's less expensive and not sort of as time consuming as the Master of Divinity degree is, so that you don't have some of that debt. Now at Phillips, what we've done is we scholarship people heavily to try to address that issue, so that many of our students receive 100%, and then if not 100%, students receive 80%, so that it lessens the debt when they come out. But a lot of seminaries cannot do that, so that it makes it difficult. So people are doing these alternative ways now, even in mainline. So I actually think we are moving in the direction of some of those other places, because the reality is that people are saying, if I'm going to be the pastor of a congregation of 15 people, why do I need to go into debt $40,000? I mean, so that is the sort of challenge that you face. So yeah, good question. Good. Any others?
Do you have a program by which the non-Master of Divinity to help congregations, small congregations in smaller communities, we call them commissioned pastors. Do you have a program of educating those people?
We do, and the Disciples also calls them commission, and actually there's a discussion right now of some places ordain, because disciples are congregationalists, so it can depend on what they call them regents. Some of them actually can be ordained, and some of them continue to be called commission. But we have what is called the Center for Ministry and Lay Training, and those individuals can take what equates to courses that you would get in seminary online through sort of Zoom, where you could be anywhere in the country and do the study and do 10 classes and be commissioned for ministry. And the courses are $100. So you can see the difference in price versus going to seminary or paying $100 for that sort of commissioning courses. So absolutely. And the reality is there will probably be, particularly for disciples, there will be more people going through that sort of training than coming to seminary in the future, because congregations can't afford, most of the people are going to be bivocational. So congregations are, except for a few. We're talking about Harvard Avenue. So Harvard Avenue would be the exception. They will all, right now be able to afford someone who is ordained, but most of the churches are not going to be able to afford that type of person.
Is that because people are not going to church, or people with money are not going to church?
Oh.
No, it's a great question. No, it's a really good question.
Good question. Good question.
I would actually argue that people with money are who is in the church. The problem is those individuals typically are 65 to 70 and older. And there's going to become fewer of those individuals, and what you don't have are the people behind them who have the same commitment to church that many of those individuals did. So that's where you see the sort of the drop off. So, but those individuals who have money are actually the ones keeping these denominations alive right now. Because if it wasn't for those individuals, these denominations would have disappeared a long time ago. And because of some of those individuals, some of these churches have endowments. So the United Methodist Church, we have churches with $10 million endowment have 10 people in them. So they can continue doing what they're doing because the endowment basically pays their bills.
Yeah.
But it's not that they actually are vital in terms of individuals. Yeah.
I went to a PW, Presbyterian Women's Conference,
Mhm.
and I was so surprised at the energy and enthusiasm of women wanting to push women to be more active in the church and in church government and all aspects of the church. And I think that's a new move that we haven't seen since the 70s.
Mm.
And I was encouraged by that.
Yeah. It's good. Any others before I go on a little bit longer?
Please continue.
All right. So, as I think about this question, then I've got to sort of figure out, not only what's happening now, but where's theological education headed in the future, and what does that mean for Phillips? Phillips is very ecumenical. Disciples as a whole are very ecumenical, and I would say smartly so, given that there are only 250,000 disciples in the United States. There are 4 disciple seminaries, and none of the disciple seminaries could make it strictly off of being disciple students. I mean, there would be no way to do it. So the question then becomes sort of what kind of vision do you create thinking about sort of what is happening in theological education? And for me, I borrow from someone called Lovett Weems, thinking a vision of what is possible. What is it that we can sort of see as a possible future together as we move forward? And when I think about this, I talk about it sort of in 3 Ds that I will share with you. So sort of what is the dream that we would have in terms of this work? What makes us distinctive in this work? And sort of where is the destiny that we would have, where we would head? And as president, I'll add a 4th D that is critical to the other 3 Ds, and that's development. How do we pay for all of this work that we have to do? So you're shaking your head, yeah, so.
Long time in
Yeah, yeah, so you understand that. So the other 3 are good, but you also have to pay for it. So that is the key. I'm a big Howard Thurman fan. I don't know if you all have ever done anything with Howard Thurman or know about Howard Thurman. I see you in hand. So Howard Thurman was an individual who some consider to be sort of a spiritual practitioner. His sort of most well-known work is Jesus and the Disinherited. Martin Luther King Jr., they said used to carry that book around with him everywhere that he went, that he was so influenced by Howard Thurman and his work. But Thurman has this quote where he talks about a life worth living. And for me, that phrase of a life worth living, I think, is sort of the dream that I believe we should have in theological education. And this comes to, I don't know her name, but how do we really help articulate a life worth living for people who want to imagine, borrowing from King, sort of the beloved community? So how do you actually sort of articulate that well? How do you educate people for that sort of a dream of a life worth living? So that to me is sort of the dream, that we want to help students to be educated for creating in their congregations and in their communities this ideal of a life worth living. And it's a big dream. I mean, that is a lot of work, and I think extremely tough to do for many reasons. Distinctive. I don't know that that dream is actually distinctive in and of itself, but my hope is that there are a few distinctives for that dream that we at Phillips can be doing. One of those distinctives I already shared is our Center for Ministry and Lay Training. So through our Center for Ministry and Lay Training, I think what will be critically important is not only the work we do sort of traditionally in the Master of Divinity, but how do we create resources for classes like this? You know, how do we create resources for laity and congregation blessing? That has not been something that seminaries have always done well, but it's something that I think seminaries are going to have to do a lot better at, is really creating resources that can be used in sort of Bible study, Sunday school classes, or in sort of other spaces by lays. And my hope is we have a leg up having a center that will be able to do that work. One of the things that we're doing through the Center for Ministry and Lay Training, we got a grant from Lilly for, we're calling a Town and Country Leadership, Rural Ministry. And in rural ministry, it hits a lot of what we were talking about. Rural areas often, smaller congregations, but those congregations are important to the community. Oftentimes, when seminary students, which might be a first sort of place they end up going into ministry, going to those places, they go into them sort of wanting to change the people, to think these huge, big ideas for justice, and it fails miserably, right? Because those people who've lived in those communities a number of years and sort of understand sort of a way of life that might be different. So really helping students to hopefully understand context better when it comes to when you go into that sort of a pastorate, that they actually are interested in justice, but typically it's more localized. They want to make sure the people in the community are taken care of, and that is justice work, you know, so that you've got to start with where the people are, not try to convince them to do something that is disassociated from who they are. But at the same time, working with congregations in those communities to understand that you just can't be insular, that you know, it's important that you really do engage the community and that you are vital to community. Not in terms of that you're necessarily trying to grow numerically, but really that the congregation is central to the community. So I'm excited that we have a grant that will help us do that work. So we'll get to see where that leads. The other one, I think, for us is we have the Center for Religion and Public Life. And here the goal is to, we talked about Charlie Kirk earlier, so this would be sort of an attempt where we're trying to help people to think more deeply about the intersection between religion in politics, sort of in the public square, and to not just take one simple solution, but think about the complexity of it and how that works together. So our person leading that started in January. They were finishing up another job, so they'll come full-time in July, but we'll do monthly blog, a monthly podcast where they'll have different guests on to sort of unpack that, share resources of other books and things, but really try to do the work of helping people, again, in general, to think more broadly about sort of what that means. And finally, let me say this last one, and then I'll pause for questions before development. Destiny. So where is it that we hope to head? For me, it would be that theological education is going to always be educating those who will be leaders of congregations, but that work would become more broad. That is not just the pastor, but that there would be others within the congregation that we're educating also. And that we would be seen as a place or a resource for the congregation as a whole, and not simply sort of professionally for the pastor. So I think, can we make that shift from being strictly about educating sort of the professional pastor to more broadly, not only educating the professional pastors, but educating people like yourselves who would be leaders in the congregation. So that would be the destiny. Will we get there? I have no clue. So that's it. I have no clue. I think this is the struggle for all the people in my position throughout the United States. I mean, similar sort of thinking, the sort of same struggle in terms of, even though they would use different language, but that is sort of the same struggle that we all have at this point in time. All right, let me pause there and take questions. Dream, distinctive destiny.
I'm just curious, how many Master of Divinity students do you have at this time?
We have right now, and I just looked at this number, about 60 Master Divinity students.
Good.
Yeah, so we are, because of what we're doing, like I say, Phillips is fortunate in terms of resources. We had a really good entering class last year. We'll have another good one this year. And I put our number, we need to have about 200 total students between Master Divinity, Doctor of Ministry, and the other sort of degrees. Some seminaries that are dependent on student tuition are trying to get 400 or 500 students. I mean, since we're paying so heavily, that just costs us money. So we don't need that many students. So we need about 200 students. So I think that helps us tremendously in terms of the model. So that's helpful.
Thank you.
So the beloved community image is really exciting and intriguing. And I heard one interview of Krista Tippett and Thurman. That was amazing. I'm specifically excited about what College Hill and Phillips can do in that space. We've already got a relationship. I know people on session would be excited to partner, and we could be a little laboratory. You could try things out on us. You could get your students integrated more. And that would that's an exciting space. And I don't know if you're in a position yet to start anything, but we would be very open to that, growing that partnership.
I love it. That would be great. And we will need those sort of partnerships, so I appreciate that.
His dad was a theologian, taught at PU.
Yeah.
Do you know that? Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wasn't that right?
Yes.
No, that's fantastic. So I appreciate that.
Well, and following up on that, and I know we've tried numerous ways over the past, but we sit right next to an educational institution with all these young people who are here and keep coming year after year. And to be able to do that here with you and figure out how that can be done, or how many different ways that can be done. I think that would be exciting and fun
Yeah.
and challenging. And
Yeah.
all of those words.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. One of the things that I've never sort of left my business background. There was a gentleman, Clayton Christensen, who unfortunately passed away, but taught at Harvard, but wrote in the early 2000s. He wrote about disruption and became really big, and he was writing sort of about the computer industry and how oftentimes what happens in business is not failure, but is actually success that hurts businesses. So an example would be Blockbuster. So Blockbuster dominates the marketplace. Everybody goes to Blockbuster, they rent their videos. Along comes this thing called Redbox. And Blockbuster actually could have done that. It was actually offered to them to say, hey, you can do this. And they said, well, nobody's ever going to do that. They want to come to our stores. And Redbox put them out of business, right? Because you can go get this for $1. Why am I going to go and pay all that money? But he says there's those sort of disruptions that are critically important in the business world. So for me, thinking about what does that disruption sort of look like in theological education and in the church of, how do we do where you don't sort of, you're still watching the movie, but the delivery of it became really different, which was the disruption. Any others? And dream, distinctive destiny. I got a couple more words and I'll take questions.
Possibilities just boggle the mind.
They do. So, as you were laughing, Betsy, development. So development is a key piece of this. I mean, all of these things, it's about how do you steward resources to do them well. So in theological education, one of the ways that we're able to sort of do experimentation is through Lilly Endowment. So Eli Lilly, who you're all familiar with, the drug company, they have what is called the Lilly Endowment that really, I say, is the biggest funder of theological education in the world. So in some ways, it's sort of weird to think that a drug company funds theological education for the most part. But Lilly gives out grants, and they do several grants for theological education. And because they have been so successful, they literally have not been able to give away enough money over the past few years, which again is a strange sort of thing to think about in terms of this. But one of the ways that seminaries have been able to do sort of this experimentation is because of Lilly, sort of like what we're doing with the Town and Country. So that's one sort of source of development that is critical if you're able to get one of those grants. We also at Phillips have invested in, I don't know if you all have had a chance to come to campus at any point in time, but the original building, the Cadjo building, is the older building that was donated by Quick Trip. But we just opened this year, completed Bedford House. So Bedford House has 25 rooms and 2 apartments. And the rooms are sort of like if you stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, so they're really nice rooms. So for when students come in for intensives, they'll have a really nice place to stay right there on campus. But it also allows us to do retreats for congregations or others who come in. So as you think about it, because it has space for people to hold nice retreats, it has a labyrinth in the middle of the
Very
space.
cool.
So a really nice place. So that sort of investment of helping to connect us to the church. Bedford House will not make money in the sense of like if you were running a hotel, and that was not the purpose of it as a missional effort, but it's how do we really connect to congregations deeper as we do this work, and think about also the students and their ability to be there on campus. So that's a second piece of investment. And then, of course, there's just the good old-fashioned development work that has to be done of donors and those who help support theological education. But that sort of development work is also critical to the work that has to be done for what we do. With that, I'm going to stop, and I think we're about 8 minutes out for class, so probably a good place to stop and take any questions that you all have at this point in time.
So regarding the development, do you find with your regular donors that they are also aging, and that so you will be facing, and fewer younger
Yes.
donors are taking their place?
Absolutely. You know, we are right now, I've been working with development, two things. One is, of course, those who are aging, to see if they are willing to sort of leave a legacy that will help. But the other is, when you look at the donor pool, 65, 70% of them are over age of 65. So when those donors are no longer giving, you're gonna have a huge drop off. So starting now saying we really have to work on alum and others, getting them connected to start building up that next group of donors. So yeah.
I think we as a church face similar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a, I mean, it's a real challenge. So last year, you know, just to start this process when I just started first time, they had never done sort of a day of giving, sort of targeting alum, and I said, you know, the goal here is not to raise a ton of money, but it's to get people who've never given to donate $5, $10, whatever it is, because as you know, you just got to get people in the habit of doing it. And it worked out, 50 new donors.
Nice.
Yeah, so I mean, it worked out well. Now the question is, will they continue to give? I mean, but that's the sort of work that you have to do.
That's been a downfall in churches over the centuries. The older people are more reliable, and that's what happens to a lot of churches when the old people die off.
Yeah.
They end up closing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with being in partnership with Lily, is there any pharmaceutical expectations?
Not at all. Complete. The endowment is completely. The endowment just strictly does
hallucinogens.
Yeah. It could be helpful sometimes.
Yeah.
I think, but no, it's the endowment strictly just based off of whatever money comes in. They determine what will be the type of grant, but beyond that, no connection.
Okay.
Yeah. Except that it's sort of humorous that a drug company.
Well, when you think about it, you
Yeah.
think, well, what is their idea?
Yeah.
Are they getting a foot in the door?
Yeah.
Following up on our earlier discussion about the letter and the spirit, it's sort of a stereotype of some Presbyterian seminaries and other seminaries, highly educated, is that very good at deconstruction and really bad at sort of equipping a whole person to go out and minister to a congregation and be a pastor. Do you have any programs specifically designed to help people handle deconstruction and sort of navigate that?
Yeah, we're actually working on that now. It's going to be interesting. When I don't know if the dean is coming to the class, but we're
Lisa
doing,
Davison?
Yeah,
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, so we're doing imagining a curriculum where we're looking at sort of, we did surveys, and of course in the surveys what you get back is exactly that you know, brilliant, you know, that deconstructing, but leadership, overall things really struggle. So part of it is sort of trying to figure out and work with faculty of, how do we better shape the curriculum to address some of those concerns. But I also think working with denominations of what is it that as a denomination that you're doing to help prepare them for some of these practical realities, while at the same time we're trying to educate them theologically to be able to think about these things in the appropriate way. And oftentimes denominations and seminaries have been at odds with one another and haven't really worked well together.
Right.
So having to work much closer, I hope, with denominations to really thinking about it, because it's going to be critical. I mean, we're only hurting ourselves if we don't prepare people well to do that sort of integration.
Our former pastor shared some sort of seminary horror stories. Well, he didn't put it that way.
Yeah.
But he had a mentor who said, Todd, you need to get the Spirit back, and you need to find the Spirit. And part of his journey in this congregation was his journeying with us to explore spirituality and being open to the Spirit. But it feels like if seminary students could have at least mentors or maybe even courses on the mystics or something to help them and understanding of Bonhoeffer's view of the beloved community as well, the church in the center of and the beloved community. I think all of those are really exciting that you're exploring that.
Yeah.
But Todd Freeman, anyway, is maybe already teaching there, is maybe a resource to talk about his war stories.
I just saw Todd on Thursday. No, I guess it was Wednesday technically, because he does Presbyterian polity for us.
Right.
Yeah. Any others in the last couple of minutes?
This is very exciting.
Thank
you
all.
for sharing
Yes.
your thoughts on the future. I'm optimistic for
I am too.
you and the church.
Yeah, I am optimistic. I think it will look different, but I'm very optimistic about, overall what's going to happen. So I am. Well, thank you all.
Thank you for your presence.
What would be your thoughts about, and this may be a wrong perception, but the younger generations being just anti-institution, anti-commitment to a community or membership. Is that a reality, or is that just something
I'm gonna frame it just a tad bit different. I think many younger people don't use the language of membership, but use the language of belonging. And for them, belonging is what is the critical piece, and not necessarily joining the way that we traditionally have thought about it. So they're interested in the community piece of it, and for them, that's where the belonging actually comes in of that. I absolutely want to be with this group of people who will help me on my spiritual journey. But I'm not necessarily as invested in this technical term of membership in the way that we sometimes think about it in the church. Unlike American Express, they don't see the benefits of it, for that sort of language that is used. In terms of anti-institutional, I think for some of them, what has happened is they see the institution as not actually doing the work. And they're often really interested, you think about justice, they really are interested in, how do we actually do the work out there on the streets in the neighborhoods and have an impact, and not sit inside a building and talk about what is important. So I don't know that they're anti-institutional, but they certainly are anti-sort of institutional if it means just simply thinking about continuing sort of the building and the structure. They want to know, what is the real impact we're going to have in the community.
Thank you.
Good luck with your calling.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, look forward to coming back again
Yeah.
someday.
Yes.
You close us
That'd
in
be
prayer.
wonderful.
I would love to
Yeah.
close you in prayer.
Thank you.
Gracious God, we're so thankful for this time, this space. We continue to lift up the work you're doing, not only at this place, but in this class. We ask that you touch the hearts and minds of all of those in this space. We ask this in your son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dr.
Very
Powe.
much. Going in new directions, speaking of going in new
Let's
directions,
work.
could we have it a little bit warmer now that?
That's what I want to do.